I knew things were unraveling the second Darren walked past me without saying a word. Again. He'd always been the type who couldn't tell the difference between a server rack and a wine rack, but now he strutted through the office like he'd just personally coated the backbone of the company. His sisters weren't any better. Lindsay, with her influencer-level wardrobe and freshly whitened teeth, chirping about streamlining digital touchpoints, while Courtney updated the executive Slack channel with emoji-only OKRs. Their father's seat hadn't even cooled, and they were already ripping out the roots. That morning, I caught my reflection in the server room's plexiglass. Same navy cardigan, same badge I'd worn for 17 years. I still use the same mug Robert gave me after our 5th annual audit. Keep calm and trust the logs. Cute then. A ghost now. Let me pause for just a second. If you're the kind of person who gets sucked into these kinds of stories, make sure to hit subscribe and give this a like. It seriously helps the team keep telling them. 97% of people never do, and it's like yelling into a void. So if you're still with me, click it. All right, back to it. The irony? They didn't even notice I was the one still running the core systems. Every vendor authentication cycle? Me. The data pipeline flags that prevented multi-million-dollar fines? Also me. But Darren wanted clean slate architecture. That was the phrase he used. Like we were remodeling a kitchen, not running a multinational logistics backbone. The man hadn't written a single line of script in his life. But suddenly, he was CEO of an empire built on code he'd never seen, never asked to see. I remember the first time I realized how far we drifted from Robert's vision. It was during the weekly continuity check. I always ran it alone, 5:30 a.m. on Thursdays, before most people showed up. Just me, the logs, and the silence. That morning, the new IT manager, someone Darren brought in from a visionary AI startup, barged in with a protein shake and a Bluetooth earpiece still blinking in his head. "Still running that prehistoric sweep?" he asked, smirking like he'd caught me using a rotary phone. "No," I said without looking up. "I'm confirming whether the system still trusts us." He blinked. "Sorry, what?" I turned back to the screen. Trust is a setting in this environment, not a sentiment. He didn't reply, just backed out like I was contagious. That's when I started noticing the tiny shifts. Permissions requests routed to people who had no business near core. Back-end flags overwritten manually. The new DevOps contractor tried to delete a sandbox environment called Ouroboros, flagged it as clutter. System rejected him with a message that just read, "Founders layer integrity preserved." He thought it was a glitch. It wasn't. Robert and I built that sandbox the same week his 3rd grandchild was born. He was tired, not sleeping much, but sharp as ever. Said to me, "We're not building a product anymore, we're building a spine. Doesn't matter what bells and whistles they layer on top, if the spine breaks, the body collapses." That was Robert, and that was the version of Nortridge I stayed for. The morning after his retirement party, I sat alone in the server bay with a sealed envelope in my coat pocket. He handed it to me with a crooked smile and a pat on the shoulder. "Don't open it yet," he said. "You'll know when." So I didn't. But I watched as his children rebranded everything. New Ridge, new coffee machines, new mission statement, new font on the website. They held a town hall and used phrases like disruptive convergence and AI readiness with all the sincerity of a toothpaste ad. Nobody asked how we were still SOC2 compliant. Nobody asked who had the access credentials for the backend vault. Nobody asked what Ouroboros was. They assumed the foundation was theirs, just because the building had their name on it. I didn't flinch. I just kept logging in, running the sweeps, flagging the rotations, watching the heartbeat of a system they thought was on autopilot. But autopilot only works if someone installs it right, and checks the fail-safes, and holds the key to unlock the manual override when things inevitably go sideways. And me, I never let go of the key. The memo was titled Operational Refresh, Priority Systems Review, but it read like a veiled indictment. Darren's wording was polished in that fake deferential way. We acknowledge the past stewardship of Nortridge's technical frameworks, followed 2 lines later by, "We are actively evaluating opportunities to sunset redundant legacy protocols." Translation: They thought the foundation was optional. Lindsay piled on next. Her email subject line: Innovation Roadmap, Sandbox Audit. She attached a slide deck, 38 pages of jargon and gradient gradients. At the bottom of slide 19, in Comic Sans no less, Ouroboros flagged for deprecation, associated with outdated security model plus unnecessary redundancies. I laughed out loud. Alone. In the break room, choked on my coffee. Ouroboros was our vault. It wasn't even online in the traditional sense. It was heartbeat triggered, distributed across embedded nodes, accessible only through a rotational cipher that Robert himself joked was equal parts code and religion. They were trying to kill a ghost they didn't even believe in. 3 days later, I got a calendar invite from legal. No context. Just the subject line. Systems IP dependency disclosure, internal use. The meeting room was glass-walled and freezing. Young lawyer across from me looked nervous, the type who practiced saying value add in the mirror every morning. "Thank you for joining," he started like I had a choice. "Leadership has asked us to gather a comprehensive picture of our critical infrastructure, especially anything that may impact future roadmap or..." He paused, glanced down at his notes, then leaned in. "Potential M&A scenarios." There it was. Sale was on the table. Of course it was. I nodded. "So you'd like a list of core dependencies?" "Yes. Any proprietary frameworks, embedded logic trees, license trails, anything that might represent structural risk if uncoupled." I took out a legal pad, wrote 3 lines: vendor chain integrations, flagged, sandbox environments, modular, core logic map, trust clause protected. I underlined the last one twice, then slid it across the table. He scanned it. "I'm sorry. Trust clause protected?" I smiled. "It's in the founder's estate protocol." He blinked. I don't think I've seen that in our systems agreement archive." "You wouldn't have," I said, "unless Robert gave you access to the private inheritance annex." Silence. The clause was drafted by Nortridge's original counsel, not part of operational documentation, part of estate governance. He stared wide-eyed. "Are you saying certain systems are tied to his personal estate?" "I'm saying," I said evenly, "no major system change or transfer of intellectual property tied to the core can legally proceed without one signature." "Whose?" I pulled the envelope from my coat pocket, tapped it once. "You'll know when." He left the room in a half jog. The next few days were noisier. More consultants. A new project manager from San Francisco with a man bun and a portable ring light. Teams meetings about re-architecting the stack for scale. Nobody asked why API handshake logs were bouncing with internal status codes labeled gate lock incomplete. Lindsay flagged it on Slack. "Can someone plus look into that legacy authentication loop? Seems broken?" Someone replied with a shrug emoji. They weren't ready. Not for what Robert and I built. Not for how we built it. They thought everything started when the logo changed. But the logic tree still started at root. And root was me. They could layer on their dashboards and slide decks all they wanted. But nothing they planned, migrated, sold, or merged would leave the gate unless that root was signed. And they were just now starting to realize it. They picked 3:47 p.m. on a Friday. Classic. That liminal window where people are half checked out and the office feels like a waiting room no one wants to sit in. Darren chose the big glass conference room. Probably for the optics, transparency, and forward momentum. His sisters were traveling for client strategy, translation, too cowardly to look me in the eye. When I walked in, he didn't even look up right away, just kept tapping on his iPad with a stylus that probably cost more than my first laptop. I sat, waited, let the silence do the heavy lifting. Then he slid the folder across the table. Glossy, navy cardstock, Nortridge seal in embossed silver. They really went all out. "I want to first acknowledge everything you've done for the company," he said, with all the warmth of a voicemail greeting. "Your institutional knowledge has been appreciated." I didn't speak, just opened the folder, skimmed the letterhead. One sentence jumped out, bolded in neat legalese: "Effective Monday, your role is no longer required. Strategic restructuring, no cause, no thank you, just no longer required." I set the folder down, didn't blink. He gave me a rehearsed smile. "We're entering a new phase and we need systems that reflect scalable vision." Scalable vision? I almost laughed. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and took out Robert's envelope, the same one I hadn't opened, still sealed, still bearing the faint imprint of his thumb where he pressed it into my hand that night. I slid it into my own folder, closed it, then I stood. "You're free to scale whatever you like," I said, tucking the envelope into my satchel. "Hire visionaries. Stack sprints, burn down the backlog, whatever helps you sleep." He straightened in his chair, sensing something. I'm sorry. I'm not sure I follow. I looked him in the eye for the first time all meeting. You're trying to repaint a ship mid-sail without checking who built the hull. He blinked. Excuse me? I tapped the envelope gently, once. Robert left you the building, not the foundation. Something in his face shifted. He reached for his stylus again, like it might shield him. You're saying... what, exactly? I'm saying this company still runs on protocols written when you were in high school. I'm saying that under estate governance, the core logic, Ouroboros, vendor gatekeeping, compliance validation, cannot legally be transferred, altered, or retired without one thing. I made a signing gesture in the air, then turned to leave. He stood abruptly. You're holding us hostage with obsolete infrastructure. I stopped in the doorway, turned just enough for my voice to carry. No, I'm safeguarding what still works from people who never bothered to ask how. Outside the room, no one looked up as I walked past. No dramatic hallway goodbyes, just the familiar hum of servers and the distant clack of a new intern trying to reset her password again. At my desk, I packed methodically. One coffee mug, one backup drive, already encrypted. The printout of Robert's original logic map, still folded in my bottom drawer like a blueprint no one believed was real. And one envelope. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't angry, but because anger needs a target. And Darren? He wasn't the villain. He was just the kind of fool who inherited a crown and assumed it came with a throne. The difference was written in every line of code still pulsing beneath their vision decks. And as of Monday, they'd finally be on their own. Let's see how far they get. They thought they'd be live by Monday. That was the plan. 2 weeks of agile transition into a sleeker, cloud-native version of Northridge's backbone, prepped for integration with a SaaS powerhouse in Palo Alto. The acquisition wasn't public yet, but whispers floated. Equity talks, digital twin language, terms like multi-vertical synergy. The kind of talk that sounds impressive until a system says no. It started small. A migration script timed out during sandbox replication. Then another. Then an entire testing environment refused to mount. Darren blamed the cloud consultant. The consultant blamed the legacy logic. Lindsay flagged it in a group thread with a thumbs down emoji and a passive-aggressive gif that read, "Did you try turning it off and on again?" Then came the real wall. The first set of external API handshakes failed at step 3, authorization phase. Not unauthorized, not access denied, just a looping stall. The system didn't reject them. It just waited. An engineer flagged the audit log. It read, "Trusted signatory not verified. Ouroboros node awaiting validation." Nobody knew what it meant. One junior backend dev thought it was a joke. Is Ouroboros a test environment? They tried to delete the node. The command returned a silent failure. Then it reappeared. Same name, same config, same encryption key nested in a 512-bit lattice with a callout tag labeled MBRN 7.24.07. My initials. My timestamp. July 24th, 2007. Lindsay summoned a consultant from Denver who billed $3,000 an hour. He lasted 2 days before leaving with a headache and a cryptic post-it. Your system doesn't fail, it defers. By week's end, they had 6 contractors, 4 internal devs, and 2 product managers burning 14-hour days trying to map the dependency tree. They couldn't. It wasn't documented, not fully, not anywhere they had access to, because the map wasn't in a system. It was in my head, and, in one case, in the bottom drawer of a file cabinet that no one had opened since the last SOC2 review. Not that it mattered. They still thought the problem was code. It wasn't code, it was the absence of trust. You don't just flip a switch on a compliance-anchored system, built to survive the death of its own creator. You don't shove a SaaS pipe into a core built on lineage, handshakes, and encrypted gate checks without knowing the password. And the password wasn't alphanumeric, it was a signature. And until they had mine, Ouroboros wouldn't move. One dev finally posted the question out loud in the internal Slack. Does anyone know who is the trusted signatory? No one replied. But somewhere in the logs, the system had already answered. They just didn't like what it said. She came in swinging. Lindsay had that kind of energy, like a middle manager on a Red Bull drip, convinced that enthusiasm could outpace entropy. I heard through the grapevine she'd taken personal ownership of the transition, which, in Lindsay speak, meant she was about to break things she didn't understand and then host a meeting about it. Her first move was laughably predictable. Override protocol from the UI level, she used her admin key to try and remap permission nodes. Didn't work. So she escalated, reassigned system credentials to herself, Darren, and one of the acquisition liaisons from Palo Alto. The system accepted the entries, but none of them worked. See, acceptance wasn't the same as recognition. You could write any name on a lock. That didn't mean the key would turn. Still, they pressed on. She pulled in a fresh dev team, this one from a startup that bragged about redefining cloud-native identity layers. They swaggered into the server room with cargo vests, coffees, and startup arrogance. I saw one of them lean over a terminal and whisper, "What even is this?" They'd barely started the rebuild when the triggers began to fire. Procurement systems stuttered, just flickered. A 27-second stall in the invoice queue triggered cascading failure notices across the automated supply chain. 4 different vendors pinged the procurement lead asking if Nortridge was under investigation. One even paused delivery pending renewal confirmation, per the contract clause I'd embedded 8 fiscal years ago. All renewals contingent on founders' layer approval. Meanwhile, over in legal, the archive system threw itself into read-only mode. Files went dark, metadata stripped. The system logged each failed access attempt as non-verified actor intrusion, archive lockdown engaged. Someone tried to brute force the access. That triggered a delay chain. 48 hours. During that window, the vendor renewal portal stalled. Nothing could be signed. Nothing could be released. And every time they tried to override it, the same soft denial returned, awaiting core approval. One by one, the systems folded inward, not catastrophically, just enough to make it impossible to operate at scale. HR's payroll sandbox threw errors. The contract version control system began versioning the same document over and over again, pinging legal with looping approval authority unresolved. Even the internal reporting dashboard started pulling ghost metrics from the pre-transition period. Then came the alerts. Not loud ones, just the slow, steady drip of automated notifications routed to a passive monitor buried behind 3 levels of legacy infrastructure. The screen, still mounted in the original server room, was supposed to be decommissioned, but there it was, still alive. The top bar read Founders Layer, Access Class Alpha underneath, a quiet feed of system triggers scrolled by in monochrome green. Auth node, unverified override attempt, O3 pipeline, vendor gate bypass, denied archive, state, immutable lock, activated core signal, trust flag raised. Lindsay stood in front of it, according to a junior sysadmin, staring like she'd just seen a Ouija board move on its own. They had forgotten, or maybe never learned, that systems can inherit personality, that trust isn't just a box to tick, it's a state of relation coded deep in the logic tree. Darren once said in a meeting that legacy architecture was like an old radio, outdated but charming. He didn't realize it was a war bunker, designed to hold, protect, and wait for a signal it trusted. Not a name, not a title, a signature. And until that signature came, it would resist anything that smelled like takeover. Every modern veneer they'd slapped onto the system, every dashboard, every access panel, every integration widget was just that, a veneer. A layer of makeup over a face that still looked to me. They tried to bluff their way through due diligence like you could PowerPoint over a landmine, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. The West Coast firm, Sterling Bridge, all glass buildings and Patagonia vests, sent in their audit team expecting to find scalable infrastructure and turnkey integrations. What they found was silence. They couldn't access a quarter of the environment. Systems returned incomplete telemetry. Documentation was spotty. Intentionally so. I never kept the real documentation in Confluence because Robert and I agreed. If it can be edited by anyone, it's not documentation. It's a liability. Sterling Bridge's head of technical review, some guy named Mikhail who looked like he lived in a Slack channel, stood in the boardroom after 4 hours and said flatly, "You're either hiding a breach or you've lost key personnel access." Which is it? They didn't have a good answer. Darren tried spin. Legacy architecture is being recontextualized for forward momentum. Mikhail blinked twice. That's not a sentence. And just like that, the acquisition stalled. The phrase that started circulating in emails, and I only saw it because a former compliance analyst, bless her, still had me in her BCC habits, was legacy chokehold. as if the system itself was acting maliciously instead of defensively, as if code was rebelling, as if I hadn't spent 18 years building the exact behavior they were now calling a bug. Darren held in all hands, one of those gut-clenching affairs where desperation pretends to be confidence. He stood under the Nortridge logo, now rebranded in soft gray with a clean sans-serif font, and said, "We will have this resolved by quarter's end. We're bringing in specialists." I imagine no one clapped. A day later, I got a message from Maya, a junior analyst I mentored years ago. Still sharp, still kind. She was always the first one to figure out the difference between broken and unauthorized. Her message was short, just a text. "They're asking who has the Ouroboros token. No one will say your name." I smiled. Not cruelly, not smugly, just with the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes when a system does exactly what it's supposed to do under pressure. Let them fumble, let them circle, let them dance around the question like it's radioactive. It wasn't a secret. They just didn't want to admit they'd already burned the only bridge that could carry them over the firewall. The legal notice came next, not a lawsuit. A letter, drafted by some firm with a name like Wilcox and Stratton, as if that made it sound more civil. Courteous phrasing. Multiple uses of appreciate. The subject line read, "Request for technical cooperation. Back-end infrastructure access assistance." The body was a masterpiece of corporate groveling. "While your employment with Nortridge Systems concluded amicably," it began, which was adorable, "we are reaching out to request your assistance in navigating a critical back-end stack transition currently impacting planned M&A proceedings." They didn't offer compensation, just appreciation and recognition of legacy expertise. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. I wasn't. Anger burns too fast, and I'd learned long ago how to hold a cold line. But if they wanted my help, they could learn what Robert always knew. Trust isn't given in crisis. It's earned in the years before it. And me, I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. They'd already built the system to listen for mine. The call came at 9:17 p.m., my landline, of all things. I hadn't given that number to anyone at Nortridge since the office upgraded to Zoom everything. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" Silence, then a breath. Then, "It's Lindsay." Her voice was different, no performance, no buzzwords, just the kind of clipped tone people use when they've run out of plausible deniability. "I know this is unusual," she said carefully, "but I wanted to ask you something directly, off record." I said nothing, just waited. She exhaled again. "What exactly did our father put in that envelope?" I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the edge of the woods, where a motion light had just kicked on. A deer flicked its ears and froze. "I told you not to open it until you knew when," I said. "We know now," she said quietly. "Then open it," I replied, with legal present. She didn't argue, she just hung up. 2 days passed. Then the email came, sent from a paralegal at Wilcox and Stratton. No message body, just an attachment labeled Estate Addendum Founders Layer Clause .pdf. I opened it. There, printed on Nortridge letterhead in Robert's distinct cursive, half print, half defiant loop, was a single statement. No major system change or sale may occur without the signature of the person who built our core. Below that, in sharp black ink, 2 words, M. Brennan, my name. No title, no modifiers, just the person. The human behind the architecture. Estate sealed, final. I read it once, twice. I didn't smile, I didn't laugh. I just felt the room tilt slightly as the weight of inevitability shifted from their hands back to mine. They'd built everything on top of what Robert and I had buried beneath bedrock. Their consultants never knew the bedrock existed. Their lawyers didn't understand what systems bound by trust look like. Their own internal maps were missing the most critical node, me. I didn't call back, didn't send a reply. The next ping came through the emergency contact channel, one I had set up during Y2K prep and never deactivated. It buzzed once, then displayed a single line. "Confirm receipt, awaiting instruction." I closed the laptop, stood, walked to the drawer where I kept Robert's old field notebook, his fountain pen, and the now empty envelope. The page was out in the open now. But the ink? That still hadn't been written. And until it was, nothing, absolutely nothing, would move. They thought the clause would slow them down. What they didn't expect was how fast the acquiring firm pulled out. Sterling Bridge issued a formal notice within 48 hours of receiving the estate document. The phrasing was cold, surgical. Given the presence of unresolved access authority tied to estate-bound governance, we are ceasing all forward motion under current conditions. Translation: no access, no trust, no deal. The Nortridge board convened an emergency session. Half the members had never even met me. Most assumed I'd been part of legacy IT long since phased out. The other half? They remembered me from the early audits, the deep dives, the nights when Robert and I ran diagnostics from folding chairs because the HVAC failed. They knew I didn't bluff, and I didn't burn, but I did build. The panic turned quickly, not into rage, but into something much more useful: humility. I didn't hear from Darren, not directly. Instead, I got a quiet email from the board secretary, a woman named June who had always signed birthday cards and remembered who drank tea instead of coffee. Her message was short: the board is prepared to open formal conversation. We would appreciate your terms. That word, appreciate, it held weight this time. I waited 3 hours before replying, not as a power play, just to be sure I meant what I wrote. My response was a single line: continuity requires trust, and I no longer bill in salary. The document that followed, drafted in silence, revised only twice, was clean. No job title, no department, no KPI review cycles, just a perpetual consulting contract. Terms were simple: no office hours, no standing meetings, no obligation to participate in internal org structure. Full autonomy to review, approve, or deny any core protocol changes. Final clause, page 6, in smaller print. All protocol changes require the signature of M. Sir Brennan, founder systems architect emeritus. That last word, emeritus, was my idea. Not for prestige, just for clarity. I wouldn't rejoin the machine, I wouldn't take a desk under the new logo, but I would remain embedded where it mattered, beneath every system heartbeat, every vendor cycle, every compliance renewal that tried to run without roots. The version control system reverted to normal within hours. The procurement backlog cleared in a day. Ouroboros came alive again, quietly, with no fanfare, as if it had simply been waiting for permission to exhale. They didn't throw a welcome back party, didn't send cupcakes or flowers. What they sent was cleaner: silence. And beneath that silence, something older, steadier. Respect, not the loud kind. The kind that understands structure always wins over speed, and that foundations don't shout. They simply hold. The air up here smells like cedar and silence. Morning light filters through the trees, slow and patient, like it knows time isn't something I chase anymore. I make coffee the old way. Percolator on the stovetop, 2 scoops too strong. The kettle clicks once when it's ready, and that's the only alert I allow before noon. The cabin has no neighbors, just the lake, a dirt road, and the old generator I wired myself. The satellite line comes in clean, encrypted, hardened, and ping quiet except on Wednesdays. That's when the pulse comes through. A low-priority signal, stripped of emotion, just data and need. Request, protocol adjustment, request, renewal key extension, request, vendor flag override. Sometimes I grant them, sometimes I don't. There's no appeal process. They know that now. In the early days, they used to follow up. Just wondering if you've had a chance to review, or per the board's alignment goals. You could almost hear the ghost of corporate politeness trying to claw its way back into relevance, but they stopped. Somewhere between the third unanswered follow-up and the second silent rejection, they realized the truth. They don't have access, they have permission, and permission is earned. Still, every week. I haven't spoken to Darren since the contract was finalized. He still leads apparently, shows up on panels, gets quoted in startup newsletters about next-gen resilience. That's fine. Let him have the spotlight. I was never built for it. Lindsay sent me a gift once, a rare bottle of scotch with a note that simply read, "You were right. I never opened it. Not out of spite, just completion." The cabin doesn't have much. 1 terminal, hardened, cold boot only, 1 drawer with Robert's watch in it, still ticking. A little slower now, the way machines do when they've outlived their creators but haven't outlived their meaning. And next to it, the envelope. Still crisp around the edges, though I've opened it enough times to know the texture of the paper by feel alone. His handwriting never changed. That final line, bold and clean, cut deeper than any memo ever could. No major system change or sale may occur without the signature of the person who built our core. He didn't say trusted team or designated successor. He said person. He knew what legacy actually means. It's not title, it's not ownership. It's not passing the torch to whoever's standing closest when the lights flicker. It's knowing who built the fire in the first place and signing your name to it, then standing by it even when no one remembers why the fire still burns. So I close the drawer, take a sip of coffee, and wait for the next ping, if it comes. Because legacy isn't about inheritance, it's about integrity that signs its name and means it.